all of us are longing to belong. And as part of that is just the feeling of being held and knowing it's okay to cry, knowing it's okay to be joyful, just to be able to feel okay and complete with everything that we might want to feel.
Hello, friend, and welcome to the Sex Upgraded podcast, a podcast for men all about sex, where we'll combine real, authentic, and down-to-earth conversations about sex, life, and relationships with some pretty wild personal stories and practical how-to episodes as well, with guest experts from around the world to help you have the most amazing sex life you can possibly have. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host on this journey, and it's my goal with each episode to give you practical, actionable things you can start doing today to improve your sex life and your entire life, because a thriving sex life will help you thrive in all areas of your life. So let's begin today's episode by starting with a deep breath in through the nose into the belly together. Exhaling with an audible sigh. And let's get into today's episode. Hello, Fox. Welcome to the show. I'm super excited for this episode and just to be here sitting with you in person to talk about grief and sex and everything related to that. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, and I've got a whole sheet of notes here of stuff to go into, and just thanks for showing up for this.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited for this.
Awesome. So before we get into everything, I'd like to start with an icebreaker question. And that is, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice about sex when you were younger, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, that's a good one. Let's see. I think I'd tell myself to just slow down, that there's no end goal, and it's not about having as many partners as possible. It's not about getting straight to intercourse or ejaculation, but just finding the enjoyment in it, and really finding my own enjoyment and knowing that might radiate to my partner or just for myself, others involved.
Slowing down.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, that's so important. So important. And so as we go through these questions, maybe we'll take some breaths along the way to make sure we don't rush through them all, to really absorb all this good stuff.
Good plan.
And so I want to ask you about your life and how you got here. But first, I just want to open the doors a little bit with some intellectual understanding and creating a shared vocabulary and shared understanding of what is grief to you. You know, what is grief and how does it happen and how does it show up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For me, my first connection with it was just experiencing it full on for about a year, going into what I call a grief initiation. And nobody had really warned me about that or really told me what that was. And since then, I've had a lot of amazing teachers, both in book form and ancestor form and live elders, really kind of show me this old wisdom on what this is. And so I draw more from old stories and old ways more than anything, kind of from psychology books or kind of intellectual diatribes on that. And blending that all together, the simple is that grief it's the loss of what we've loved. Grief is this force, this energy that wants to move inside of us. And it's usually, as we go through life, we love things. Our heart just kind of swells and opens and expands to them. And when those things are gone, so kind of in the shadow of love or in the vacuum that it creates when it's not there, we're left with this grief. And in that way, it's a very natural thing.
Mm.
It's kind of like just the opposite side of the coin as love. It honors, gives praise to those things that we truly cared about in a deep way, and comes with its own feelings, ways that it shows up in our body. And the grief I'll talk about, within the context of this conversation is grief with a big G. So not necessarily just crying, but all the types of energy, even emotions we don't have words for yet, that wants to move through us when we're not feeling the best. Whether we lost our mother or our father, or whether we hear news about destruction of this forest, or that oil pipe burst line polluting the waters, or when we feel into the bits of shame inside of us, the places that haven't learned love.
Yeah. So it sounds like this is not the same as feeling sad. Right.
Feeling sad is part of it, for sure. But it's nice. One of a great leader, bless her memory, Sabanfu Somé, who helped to bring grief ritual here to the United States, would talk about grief as this big G, as like any of these emotions. So anger even fits into this category. It's more than just disappointment. We can be disappointed when we don't, get to watch the show we want to, or the store doesn't have our favorite meatball sub. But it's really when we can feel it deeply in our heart, whatever a wild expression of that, the bigger losses, however that might show itself and reveal itself.
Yeah. So probably not like if I'm watching a movie and something sad happens and I tear up. It's a little different than that.
Well, it might touch into that. And what I like to think is it's wonderful. We have these different forms of art that can help us touch into the grief that is inside of us. And there might not be that genuine grief for that character that's in the movie that, was just an actor playing this thing, but it might be touching something that's already exists inside of you, where you can really understand and feel into that emotion, that memory that's already there. I think that's the beauty of art in general. It helps us access those pieces that are real. Yeah.
It makes me think, well, my next curiosity is when I think back to most of my life, a lot of the times when I've felt like crying or I've felt sad or something like that, I've pushed it down and I've not allowed those things to happen in myself. And like, oh, crying is bad. Society says men shouldn't cry, men shouldn't feel, men shouldn't be vulnerable, all this stuff. And I see in your last interview that I listened to, you said the inability to move grief is pathological and it creates a cascade of spiritual, mental, and physical maladies. So it's kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I guess my question is like, what happens if we don't feel it? Or should we feel? Like, how should we relate to that? Like, say something happens and like, then what?
Yeah.
What happens if we push it down?
Yeah, this is really the tip of the iceberg, and where I think our culture is missing something vital. Me, like you, I've, got trained in that way of like, oh, just hold it, be strong, hold it together. Men don't cry. I think for a lot of us men, we've heard those messages and really internalized them. And what I've seen, I have a private practice. Almost a decade, I've been seeing people one-on-one for different physical and mental maladies. And over again, it was revealing and showing me that underneath anything physical, there tends to be some emotional or energetic blocks. And some of the things like the doctors couldn't touch, like would simply vaporize or go away once we were starting to deal with grief. Once people were willing to be with their emotions around something that happened, to feel out the anger that they had for their dad, or to really like allow themselves to cry for their dog. They felt like they weren't worthy to be able to do something for their pet like that.
Yeah.
And my teachers have told me, and many of the wise elders that have inspired me have all said the same thing of when grief can't move, like it calcifies. When grief doesn't have the chance to move, it can stagnate us. It can cause depression. It can cause anxiety and myriad physical maladies that I've seen within my office. And
like what? So you're an acupuncturist and an herbalist, and you do a lot of this grief work with people in groups and individuals. And I'm curious, what sort of things have you seen in your clients?
All sorts of things. It's not just one thing that shows up, because part of the teaching in Chinese medicine is that anywhere the blood flows is where our consciousness is. So when emotions stagnate, it's almost like it stagnates our blood. And for a while, I was working a lot with women, female-bodied people, and there would be so many different uterine conditions, so many gynecological issues that women would have: fibroids, endometriosis, polyps, issues with their periods, just painful periods or ones that didn't come at all. And I think one teacher would talk about the women have this like report card of their cycle that really emanates and shows them where they are physically and emotionally. And so it's all like really plain and simple there. And there's even opportunities for that blood release that comes with getting to release emotions. And that's not a mistake. That's not a pathology. That's actually a really beautiful healing thing that female-bodied people like have access to. It's a little bit more covert in men's bodies or in places in other parts of our bodies where we can't necessarily see what's going on or have that window. But for instance, I've had a patient came to see me and he couldn't get out of bed 6 out of 7 days of the week. The doctors called it chronic fatigue syndrome.
Wow.
And I talked with him about issues regarding his mother. And it really, in the course of a month, we went into it deep, and he felt all sorts of things he hadn't before, and wrote letters, and just had some huge grief releases. And that month later, he was completely fine, able to walk, able to live his life fully. But anything from like joint inflammation, to inflammation of the kidneys, to digestive issues, to cloudiness of the mind. So many conditions that just kind of start with some kind of emotional or energetic seed where emotion didn't get to move, where we didn't get to feel out things in the full way that babies do, that toddlers do, that are so connected to their joy and so connected to their grief.
And so they kind of just stay fresh. Like maybe they drop the food from their plate and it's the worst thing in the world, and a nuclear bomb goes off and they scream and cry, but then they've screamed and cried and then they're fine.
And 5 seconds later, they don't have to deal with it anymore. And I imagine a world like if we all were that close to our emotions, if we'd be carrying around any of this physical baggage.
Yeah.
If we'd all live to be 120, if we all,
Absolutely. And so one of the really important pieces that you're saying is that I'm hearing you say is that this has to move. Like our grief has to move. Like we need to do something with it to integrate it. And when you worked with your patient for that month, it sounds like it was just all kind of under the surface and festering, and you helped him, integrate this and move it over the course of a month. And I just got Brene Brown's new book. It's called The Atlas of the Heart. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a really cool book. And in there's a section on grief, and there's a section on active grief, where it's basically like, oh, this is fresh now. Some stuff just went down and ouch, like major ouch.
Yeah.
And then there's integrated grief, which is like, oh, you've taken the time to feel this and work with it. It sounds like that's where you got to. And then there's this other one called, I think they use the term complicated grief, which, I'm sure you can imagine based on your practice what that refers to, but just like the things that happen when you don't actually work with this. And so like in the context of sex, I imagine that guy who couldn't get up 6 days out of the week probably wasn't having an active, thriving sex life. And that's obvious, but I'm curious, like how else you might see it interplaying in the sexual space and the relational space. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah. Well, my mind goes immediately to the old Montauk Chia books, which I know you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about the energy moving through the microcosmic orbit. And some of these sexual practices, whether they're with somebody else or by yourself, was just allowing energy to move, not judging it or needing it one way or the next, but just for things to be in motion, because all living things are in motion, whether it's animals or trees or planets. There's just like this toroidal energy. You see it in trees of just energy coming up, out and over and around, and then energy going down. And all living bodies have this. And so grief is our ability to keep this moving. The process of grieving just keeps that energy moving, keeps it fresh. One of my teachers early on was like, there's a really big difference between grief and depression. They're kind of like cataloged similarly in the Western world. But grief is when things are moving. Depression's when it's not.
Interesting.
And so I find some of the more enlivening practices in life are helping us move that energy in our body. And that could be singing together, that could be dancing, that could be exercising, playing sports, and of course, sex is on that list.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these can help show us where there might be blockages and help us move through those blockages.
Yeah. That piece around the depression versus grief, or not versus, but in comparison to, is really interesting. In motion versus not in motion. I think back to a lot of my own sexual journey and a lot of the guys that I work with around sex. There's so many practices, especially in Montauk Chia's books and other books, that say things like, well, move your energy this way, move your energy that way, circulate this, squeeze that, do this practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember much being talked about. Oh, if you have any unresolved grief or sadness from past relationships or from whatever, here's how you can work with that so you can actually begin to move your energy.
Yeah.
That seems like a crucial step.
Yeah. And I remember when I started to play with those exercises in one lovemaking session, I was bringing the energy up and over my forehead and down into my chest. And as soon as I got to breathing into my heart, I just exploded in tears. And there wasn't a story behind that grief, but there was some big release that had just been waiting a long time to happen.
Yeah.
And it felt so enlivening. It felt so rich. And I think that's an important part of this, is when we get to move the energy. People are always asking me, like, how do you do these grief rituals all the time? Like, why do you want to keep going to sad parties? And I'm like, this brings me the most joy in my life, and others too, to actually get to move through these things and make so much space for joy and aliveness.
Yeah. So let's just jump back, because you said you started bawling in sex, crying in sex. What happened then? Like, did your partner, was it weird for them? Was it weird for you? Did you have any blocks come up, or did you just, like, what happened?
We were just able to be with it. I was in a safe enough place. I felt held, and I think it was the first time being on that side of it, because I had witnessed it the other way quite a few times, and quite a few times since.
What do you mean the other way?
Where my partner, in all my cases, I'm heterosexual, so I have all female-bodied partners.
Yeah.
And many times during the course of having sex, my partner would I'd kind of watch a dam burst open. Like there was kind of a stillness followed by a big release. And nowadays when I see that stillness, I kind of beckon. I'm like, you're safe. It's okay to feel that. Kind of are the magic words where she knows that she can open up and have that grief release, and that it's this beautiful part of the act of lovemaking. It's this healing thing. And yeah, I would say it's not a major rare thing and not a major rare exception, because I think a lot of us have been knotted up in this culture around sexuality in general.
Yeah.
It's more common than uncommon for women to have been abused or just been in sexual situations where they haven't felt held. And for them to be held and to just like normalize that kind of emotional experience in the process of lovemaking, to create that safety is a beautiful gift.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful gift for me when I got to receive it. So
absolutely. And I think back to multiple experiences I've had where I've felt maybe blocked sexually or blocked relationally with my partner, and then something happens to where I do end up crying and having this release. Then all of a sudden my system is more open to making love, like actually making love versus fucking, you know, or versus doing the like ejaculatory focused sex of just getting off. The crying and the grieving opens up my system to be able to experience these other realms of pleasure that are just beautiful and connective and vulnerable and real. And it seems like normalizing that grief and crying isn't bad. I think so many of us in this culture, like we have this story like, oh, crying is bad. You know, if my partner cries during sex or if I cry during sex, it's bad. It's bad and it's over and bad things will happen. I don't know what those bad things even are, but that's like the narrative. You know? It's the narrative that comes in. So thanks for speaking to that. And I think it's a beautiful thing to normalize.
Yeah, totally. All of us are longing to belong. And as part of that is just the feeling of being held and knowing it's okay to cry, knowing it's okay to be joyful, just to be able to feel okay and complete with everything that we might want to feel.
Yeah. And just to put a plug into some of these sexual practices that I talk about a lot too, and kind of circling back around just to drive this point home, because I think it's so important. When we say to our systems, when we don't allow our sadness or our grief to move, and when we stop ourselves from crying, we're saying to our system, basically, the movement of energy is bad. Don't do that. Like, don't move energy, don't cry, don't release. And that translates to all kinds of energy and all kinds of sensation in our body, at least in my experience and what I've been taught and what I've observed in other people. And so if you're telling your system, don't cry, you're telling your system, don't move energy, that's bad. You're also telling your system, don't move sexual pleasure, that's bad too. Or it like creates some blocks in that department to where you can't actually feel orgasmic pleasure as easily throughout your whole body.
Yeah. At one point, a friend of mine, I think she quoted Amma saying, like, if you don't grow your roots down, you can't grow your branches out. And it's part of this balance that all nature exhibits. Like, we can't have summer without winter, fall without spring. The highs and the lows are going to balance out. And so ultimately, like, our joys are connected to our grievances. And it's not, there aren't these old wise people saying like, okay, the point in life is to stay in that bliss or joy place. Many were just seeking peace in the middle, in accepting that life goes up and down. And so our part of it to have a pleasure body is to a body that can feel the aliveness of pain and sadness.
Yeah.
And if we can accept that, it can be equally as deep and juicy as our joy.
Let's all take a breath to that. It reminds me very recently, actually, an experience I had. within the last week, honestly, to bring it into the realm of the real and the vulnerable. I was having some, I'd say blocks, or it was hard for me to access arousal, hard for me to access pleasure. And I had stories thinking that like, oh, something's wrong. I need to fix something. What practice do I need to do to like generate more sexual arousal, or et cetera, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then yesterday, actually, this thing happened, and I'll save that story for another day. But what happened from that thing happening was that I ended up just crying and just breaking down and being like, oh my God, just grieving
Mm-hmm.
in my bed for a little while. And it was painful and hard, but also it was beautiful. And like after that experience, my whole system felt opened up and enlivened in this way that it just hadn't in a while, you know. And I ended up having amazing lovemaking with my partner after that. And that, you know, we hadn't been having that experience as much recently because of some of these other things. And it was amazing, like just how much that moved. And it was a good reminder to me, like, you can't microcosmic orbit your way out of something that you really need to pass and feel like emotionally.
Yeah.
You know? Or I can't. I haven't figured out how to do that.
Yeah. And for some reason, I'm getting that image of that tarot card in the typical deck called the Tower. And it's this very like kind of very rigid building that's built. Maybe the old decks, it resembled like the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
When something is so rigid and can't sway like the willow trees, is imbendable, it's bound to fall over at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Like the only choice for it is to at some point topple over and crack apart. And as these energetic, vibrant, flexible beings that we are, that happens with us too. That if we tighten, if we find ourselves with all this tension, impermeable, super rigid, there's no choice but to crack open, or just kind of, or often that happens is die.
Yeah. So I guess the next question is, how does somebody know if they have grief in their system? Or do you believe that everybody's carrying around some level of grief in this society that they're not aware of, or most people? Or like how, does that bring up anything for you?
I think most people are carrying some around.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard in this day and age to be numb to everything that's alive. And one of my favorite authors is Francis Weller, and he talks about the 5 gates of grief, which are helpful ways to just like understand it's not just when you lose somebody. He talks about one gate being the loss of something you love.
Mm-hmm.
Another being parts of the world that have been destroyed. A third is the parts inside of us that have never known love. So that could be different pieces of shame. The fourth is the fact that we weren't welcomed into a village with open hands of folks waiting for us to carry out the gifts we are bestowed with from the ancestral realms. And then the 5th gate is ancestral grief. It's stuff that our parents and their parents and their parents weren't able to process in their life, and they just kind of passed down. And I like that rubric because it shows you how wide the possibilities are of what we can feel and what we can hold on to. And so, especially some of the stuff we are born with, like not everybody knows their baseline. And only recently, in terms of, I've been doing ancestral work, I realized like how much grief there is of not living in my ancestral lands, of not having that village to welcome me in. But then if you've done any bit of therapy, you realize how much our actions and behavior are also based on just kind of micro beliefs that we have, where like maybe I don't feel good enough or smart enough, or maybe I don't feel deserving of attention or worthy of sexuality. These are these shame pieces that play into that grief piece. So forget all the people and jobs and relationships we've lost. Of course, those have an impact and we recognize, but there's all these other pieces that start to accumulate in our being. And maybe there's some lucky person out there that doesn't have grief, but I certainly haven't met them.
Yeah.
And those who have said so have come back to me later to tell me all that they felt during a ritual or during our one-on-one sessions that came out of the woodwork.
Yeah. There's so many things can contribute to that. I was reading in this book, also the Brene Brown book I mentioned, just some other like practical examples of things that could cause grief. If you're listening to this and wondering, well, how could I have grief in my system? You know, like maybe your parents got divorced and you ended up spending less time with one of your parents, you know, or maybe you got pregnant with your partner and you decided to have an abortion, or maybe there was a miscarriage, you know, and there's definitely grief potentially around that. And one even interesting thing was this idea of grief around the loss of possibility of what could have been.
Yeah.
Like in any category of anything. Like maybe you were playing a sports game and you like twisted your ankle right before the winning goal or something, you know, like that could for sure put some grief into my system. Like I'm sure I've got some grief from basketball as a kid and like missing the attempted game-winning shot or something like that, you know?
Yeah. And I think a piece I want to add into that, grief is about the body. It's about the sensations, literally feelings, which are what we feel inside of our body, which is very different than our mind, different than our thoughts. So there's a lot of situations that our mind said, okay, we're over this. Like, we're fine with this now. Like, I've mentally forgiven this person, or like, that was so long ago. Like, that's not who I am now. Those are all just thoughts and ideas and stories. But sometimes what we fail to recognize is that our body might be keeping some of those sensations, even though we're over it in our mind. There might be some residual grief left from that separation between your parents. And even in pre-verbal times of being taken away into that, NICU in the hospital from your mom just as you were born, the body seems to remember these little things, and that's where the grief is held. So as much as we might not remember something or have just thought our way through, if it's in our body, like it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you could see or make the argument or the conversation that this thing, this entity, this energy, this imprint, whatever you want to call it, that's in our body, then impacts how we act and interact in the world, and the decisions that we make and the choices that we make around our jobs and our friendships and our relationships. And maybe it might lead us to choose a relationship that might not actually be ideal for us, but because we haven't done this grief work or acknowledged that this even exists, we're going to make a decision that might not be the best for us, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah, it very much informs the way how we move through. And this gets into the realm of shadows, of just these unconscious behaviors based on the grief we're holding, based on traumas that might be there, is such a huge part of what inspires and motivates us at times. And not necessarily judged for good or bad, but just kind of can lay a framework for what we're drawn to or what we're drawn away from.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we've talked a fair amount about what grief is, how it works, where it comes from, etc., and some of the dangers of having unresolved grief. But how do you actually integrate it? Is it as simple as crying? I know you lead grief rituals in person. I'd love for you to describe those. And I'd also love for you to talk a little bit about how, if somebody can't come to one of those, like how could they actually start to work on this on their own? So does one of those feel like a more alive direction to go in first?
Yeah, they both feel very alive. Well, let me speak to the ritual.
Okay.
The ritual, as I offer it, has become this hodgepodge of different traditions that I've learned, pieces from my teachers and pieces from rituals that I've been to, integrating the power of singing, integrating the power of community, getting together and shared witnessing, authentic relating, and just a lot of indigenous teachings, beautiful cultures of the Tutahil Mayan folks through the teachings of Martin Prechtel, and also the Dagara folks from West Africa, as brought by Malidoma and Sabanfu Some. These have been kind of the bigger influences with it. Mm-hmm. But what I offer is not the same ceremony as what you might see in other places. I think for us here in the West, I've learned that we need to kind of soften and find a safety so we can become vulnerable. And I'm glad you brought up Brene Brown, because she's been such a guiding force in understanding vulnerability. So often in a given ritual, there might be 15 to, we've had 70 people come out the last few in October.
70 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we sing songs together, which kind of brings our hearts together. We do some exercises where we're looking into each other's eyes, and just sing the beauty in one another. We have a basket we pass around where people put their masks and vulnerability armor into it, like a coat check.
Are you speaking metaphorical masks or literal masks? Okay.
Yeah. So people get the invitation to just be in their soul-like self without the mask that we put on to live day to day. We're invited to show ourselves to each other in our very authentic self. So that means taking off that smile that we usually show up with. And it means to allow ourselves to surrender into that awkward feeling that comes up when we do, or those awkward giggles that come up, or those tears that run when we can look somebody directly in the eye and they can really see us. So there's different exercises that show up like this. It's kind of different every time. It's very spirit driven in the moment. And we spend about half the day doing this kind of work. And the second half of the day, we create an altar that might have pictures or pieces of people that we've lost. Not pieces of them, but pieces of different artifacts or charms, candles and flowers, things like that. An ancestor altar, a grief altar. Even these days, we have a rage altar. We set up a place to just let it out. And there's protocols for how we hold each other and witness each other with some light touch. A place to wail and grieve. And then this other place we've been developing, which is the sacred rage. We have some punching bags and some bats. Because in this culture, like sometimes that grief is sitting under a thick layer of anger that we need to feel into.
Yeah.
And not everybody's gotten that opportunity to fully feel that. Many folks have been told that their anger is not okay. And this is a place where it is okay, as long as we're not hurting each other.
I could just see the compound effect of, if you're told your anger isn't okay and you have a huge well of grief underneath that anger, then that could be interpreted as your grief isn't okay, you're not okay, and then bam, bad news.
Yeah, there's definitely that cascade effect that can happen.
So just paint a picture. So you have 70 people there, you have all these you've done these connection exercises in the beginning, and now you have these different grief stations. And the goal is to is to release your grief, to work through it, what would you say? Like, why do people come to this?
The goal is to surrender into whatever is alive inside of you. It's to slow down, to kind of come full circle and take inventory on what the body wants to say. And for most of us, there's some part of us that's talking and wants to be heard. And to give it that presence, and to give it your voice, to give it your scream, to let the wisdom of your body just move in the way it needs to, because it's appropriate in the circle, because it's welcome in the circle and it's encouraged in the circle, it's a rare thing to be in that place and offer yourself that kind of attention.
Yeah.
And then to be held in it by other folks in the circle and held by the circle itself and the elements. And we have water and fire present there, and tenders that come along helping people, and folks cleansing the space with fumitory herbs from the land. And just holding it energetically and physically so people know that they're held in this.
So people aren't there sort of fake crying to try to bring this up. It sounds like there's a deep listening that you're inviting, that you guide people through to really listen to what's in their body, to see if there are things that want to come out. And then the authentic expression of that in whatever way wants to come out is what's encouraged.
Yeah.
And
there's lots of opportunities to try things out and explore. We have different songs that kind of touch different parts of us. I usually bring different musicians in at times to where their instruments or their voice kind of touches different parts. There's an invitation I like to give people of maybe you're not feeling anything, so go in front of the ancestor altar and out loud just call your ancestors in and ask them, is there anything that they want to move through you? Sometimes that's a big ticket.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just in the middle of the authentic relating, there's huge grief releases. So it doesn't just start with the altar, but the whole day offers people a lot of different entry points.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And I could see there's multiple levels of release happening there. There's the experience of actually feeling the grief and crying or screaming or raging or however it moves. And then there's also, it sounds like, this piece about being witnessed in community, because in our society, like you said, there's so much shame and belief about, oh, crying is bad, anger is bad. But here you're having this happen in a communal context where everybody can see and hear each other doing this thing. And it's not a bad thing. And you're not pushing it away into the shadows. We're like celebrating the expression of this stuff. And so I imagine like the being in community piece is a big part of it as well.
Yeah. I like to say we roll out the red carpet for grief. Like we're normalizing this other reality where it's welcome back into not into our own experiences, but into our communities, which is hugely important, because if these are the people that we're going to celebrate birthdays with and weddings and anniversaries and bar mitzvahs, we should all get together too for these to hold each other. And that's what I've learned from these other indigenous cultures. Like they were there for each other in these times. My own lineage, which is Ashkenazic Judaism, it's just so written into the culture of like the community shows up for that person who lost somebody for a solid 7 days at their house. To tell stories and just kind of like squeeze the sponge of the heart open to start that process. And there's a requirement for an entire year for that individual to go be part of a minyan, a congregation, at least 10 people, and recite a certain prayer. And it's a technology so they're held by the community, so that in their darkest hours, that there's this requirement that they show themselves as a griever, that they stand up during that prayer so other people notice and recognize that they're going through this process, and they can get the support that they deserve from their community.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's this wisdom in these traditions from various different traditions around the world that see this as an important part of just being human, and that revere this process almost. And we're missing that a little bit, well, massively in modern Western society, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's still here, but it's been hidden away. We see it a lot in literature and movies. This whole hero's journey, that's a part of like every single movie, every single book about going into the underworld.
Yeah.
Where you face the big bad demons and then eventually you emerge the other side, like, and discover the jewels. It's just a huge metaphor for this work, for this like soul churning work of going deep inside of yourself.
Yeah.
And really being in that dark place that's scary and facing those big scary things. And only when we can do that can we emerge as this new, fresh person that's ready to sing and dance or have the best lovemaking sessions with our partners.
Man, you're probably going to laugh at this. I'm thinking of the most recent Spider-Man movie right now. Yeah. Have you seen this?
I haven't, no.
Wow. So yeah, I went to see it a number of weeks ago, and I was blown away by the amount of just raw, authentic emotion and visible grief that was in this movie. And there's moments where Spider-Man is just in his grief, like feeling it. And it's not hidden. It's not full of shame. It's just like this raw, authentic emotion. And then multiple characters are doing this. And like, I cried watching Spider-Man, which is like kind of mind blowing to say. Like in a Marvel movie, I cried in a Marvel movie. But I've talked to a number of other people who've watched this recently who also cried watching Spider-Man. And I guess I would like to think that maybe some of this wisdom is starting to be more adopted in some ways into the mainstream. I mean, it's a nice imagination, at least, but if you want a really mainstream kind of pop culture way to see some of this in action, like that Spider-Man movie is pretty cool. It's surprisingly an awesome representation of real, authentic emotion.
Beautiful. And I don't want to discount the fact that you've done a lot of work on yourself. And so in knowing you for a while, I've seen you be able to soften too and allow yourself to go there. Yeah. So that's part of the work too. We can see some of the saddest films, but when we can release and relax into it, to be right there with that main character in terms of feeling into our sadness is a beautiful thing.
So sounds almost like you're saying I should go back and watch all the other Spider-Man movies to see if I cry in those too.
Maybe so, but I know I've cried over more movies in the last 10 years than in the earlier parts of my life.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Thanks for speaking to it. And also, I just want to like highlight this point that, and maybe you can speak to this too, but because you're doing this, it doesn't mean you're weak, or that you feel, I imagine you don't feel like more of a flaccid individual because you're crying in movies, right? To me, it feels more like, oh, the energy of life, I'm allowing it to move through me. And therefore, like, I feel more alive. I feel more vital. I feel more powerful, and I feel more safe and just alive in my body and in the world, versus this, like, I know I used to think about crying like, oh, if you cry in a movie, oh, you're just one of those people, you're just like a sad person,
I think it's exactly the opposite. Like, we're stronger because we can do this. Like, our strength comes from our resilience, not from this steadfastedness. Like, I'm going to pick myself up from what's that line? Like, tongue-tied on that line, but our strength comes from being able to feel it all. And I know from practice of like Tai Chi, it's kind of the same. Your strength isn't from acting like a brick wall and standing stiff. It's your ability to move with energy.
Yeah. Yeah, let's all take another deep breath to that. That's good. That's good stuff. I want to talk about another couple of things here. God, we've covered so much awesome stuff here so far. Thank you for this conversation. It's great.
Yeah.
Everybody listening, fly to Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains, to come do a grief ceremony. Join Fox. And for those of you who can't, maybe you live in some other part of the world. Fox, how would you recommend somebody work with their grief or go into it if they're not able to come to a grief ritual? Like, are there ways to do this on their own, or are we just like damned to have unintegrated grief until we come to a ritual?
Well, I'll say that a motivating kind of vision for me is to make these more available to folks all over. And right now, I've been bringing them throughout the Southeast. So we're actually going to be doing one in Austin, Texas. I was just down in Florida doing one. I've brought them to Alabama and South Carolina. And I've been training other grief tenders to be able to hold these rituals. So there's opportunities coming up this summer to do some training around this.
Awesome.
Both in how to hold space for grief and then also how to hold these kind of ritual spaces. But there's a lot you can do by yourself if you can't make it out my way. One is having that awareness that you might be holding on to some baggage. Maybe life feels heavy. Maybe food just doesn't taste as rich as it did. Maybe it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. Maybe that inspiration's not there. Maybe you just kind of like fly through eating and you don't even remember what you're doing because your mind is somewhere else.
Maybe you've lost touch with your sexuality.
Yeah. You might be blocked in any number of different ways in your life. And I'd say step number 2 is to sit with yourself, sit quietly, and just listen to sensations. If you start getting thoughts or images in your mind, just kind of come back to your body. Ask your body what it wants to say. Is there any part of it that's tight or heavy? If you're like, is there any grief in here? Is there any anger in here? And notice, kind of do a body scan and see what's there. And that might be if you're unaware of what's there. For some listeners out there, maybe you just lost somebody and the grief is alive and on the surface.
Yeah.
If you found it or if it's present, I'd recommend, especially if it's acute, I'd recommend taking time every day to being with that grief. So a beautiful teacher of mine said, if you take time to be with your grief, it's not going to pop out in times where it's inappropriate. So if you've experienced that moment of you're out with your friends and like it's their birthday, you don't want to be the Debbie Downer. Or maybe you got unrealistically like angry at your co-parent or at your colleague. It might be time to sit down and be like, okay, let's make some space on my own time for this. So for some of my patients, I'll have them in the morning dedicate 30 minutes of like light a candle and just invite that out. And it might be finding sensations. It might be writing a letter or speaking out loud to somebody who might have caused that grief, or maybe there's some pain. If there's resistance, there's probably something to it. Maybe you haven't forgiven dad yet. Write dad a letter and say anything you want. Say exactly what you've needed to.
Mm.
Put your pen down and don't put your pen down. Just keep writing and see what comes out. Or if you're more of a oral person, just speak it out loud and see what happens.
Mm.
With that letter, you don't have to give it to them. Burn it afterwards if you want.
Yeah.
The purpose is for your journey with it. And if there's not somebody involved or something you can write to, speak out loud to God or whatever you might call that force.
Mm-hmm.
Or speak out to your ancestors and say, hey, like, help me get through this. Like, what is this I'm feeling?
And then the invitation is just to authentically feel whatever that is and allow it to move through.
Yeah.
Whether that's crying or anger or whatever.
Yeah. To follow your body. Follow the wisdom of your body. Try to avoid getting into your thoughts too much. The thoughts can help us connect into our body. But if there's some opening that happens, it might be like an urge in the body of moving in some way, or it might be an emotion that just wants to sound a certain way, or a sound your voice wants to make, to just go with it. See if you can surrender to it and free yourself with that.
Yeah. Awesome. I notice for me, something that's really helpful that helps me access those states is music, or certain kinds of music. I have actually like a cry playlist. I have a few cry songs that are my go-to. If I know that I'm feeling stuff and I can't access it, I'll put one of these 3 songs on, and 99% of the time, boom, it gets me and I just start crying. There's Sigur Rós songs. Mm-hmm. And I guess, I'll link to those in the show description if anyone wants to check those out. But music, it's a beautiful way to just access that for me.
For sure. Gosh, I want to put that on my website, I've got a bunch of grief resources that are free for anybody to check out. And I'll have to put your song list on that list. Yeah.
It's such a good one. A few years ago, so I'm a photographer for those of you listening who don't know. And a few years ago, I did a photo shoot in my studio where I brought a bunch of friends in, and we all came in with our grief song or our emotional release song. And each person got a turn in front of the camera to emote and to cry or to rage. And the access point for that, because it's kind of awkward. You have a bunch of friends sitting there and then there's a camera in your face, the point being to capture this, to share it with the world, to normalize it. The song really helped everybody just land in their body and land in that feeling. And it was a beautiful experience. It's a beautiful experience. Maybe I'll put some of those photos in the show notes too.
Beautiful.
Just to normalize it. And I like so much of this conversation too, because it's normalizing this process, and it's normalizing the fact that, hey, we all have things that have happened in our lives that suck and that hurt. And we need to actually acknowledge those and move those and breathe with those and maybe cry with them, or maybe rage and yell with them too, so that we can actually live more fully.
Yeah, for sure.
One last thing.
Yeah.
One last thing. Or who knows, maybe we'll open up some other pathway after this, but there's one more thing in my notes. And that is, practically speaking, you just mentioned if you've lost somebody, to spend some time with that grief every day.
Yeah.
Another way to lose somebody is to, not necessarily through death, but say you've just gone through a breakup. Say you've just gone through a painful relationship transition. I know in the past, I've certainly gone through those, and then boom, immediately, man up, no problem here, on to the next thing, and didn't give myself time to feel, and ended up repeating the same relationship patterns. And I thought, well, why are all these women that I'm dating, why do they all seem to have this same set of problems over time? Turns out I just actually wasn't doing my own work, and I wasn't allowing myself to feel. But what advice would you give somebody who's going through a charged breakup where they feel sadness and grief? Would you say the same sort of things?
Yeah. I mean, certainly relationship fits into that first gate. It can be that loss of the person in your life. It can be the loss of kind of a vision you have for your life. For so many of my friends, and even for myself, I know with my last relationship, I had this vision in my head of what it was going to be when we were older, and my whole family unit, and and a lot of I went through grief about losing her, and then I went through way more grief about losing this future vision. And then I went through layers of grief of losing her family, being a part of that.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of nuances and subtleties to it that come through. Grief is very nonlinear. It doesn't look this certain way or this certain path. And there's not exactly a timeline for it. You know, some people will talk about stages that you go through, and like in reality, it's just so unique and individual. And there's things we might expect along the way, but I couldn't tell you in losing that, partner of yours and that girlfriend that like, okay, jump on Tinder in about 8 weeks and it'll be fine from there. But it's good to give time and be honest about where you are.
Yeah.
And honest to maybe you start dating, honest to folks you start dating about where you are. There's this, I'm really good at botching quotes, so I'm about to do that.
All right.
There's this Rumi quote that's like, the grief for what you've lost holds a mirror up to where you're so bravely working. And so every grief opportunity like gives us this special insight onto where we are on our own individual journey. And even though we might hurt and be so full of pain for that person, that kind of like that puzzle piece that kind of fit perfectly into the puzzle of your heart. Even every separation is this beautiful mirror showing you parts of yourself. And it's a beautiful initiation and opportunity in a given breakup. Instead of pathologizing it, we're going to mythologize it and really accept that now we're on this new journey of discovering these parts of ourselves, understanding the wholeness, looking at the shame pieces and belief systems that crop up when we feel abandoned or when we feel betrayed, as a means to strengthen ourselves, to get through that dark time and build ourselves back up.
Yeah.
Into something more real, more authentic, more human, and closer to who your true nature is.
That's good. I like how you spoke to when you went through that separation, that breakup. There was, yes, the separation of your relationship, but also the loss of this future idea and also the loss of her family as well.
Yeah.
In multiple layers. And yeah, I think that's just important to realize that there can be so many facets to this.
Yeah.
I remember when I went through a really challenging breakup a number of years ago. Yes, there was the challenge around losing the relationship for sure. But another big piece of grief that came up for me was how much I actually didn't honor myself in that relationship and honor my own desires, my own boundaries and that sort of thing. And how I just sort of was passive and let things happen that I wasn't aligned with and that weren't good for me. But I didn't, I guess the simple way to say it was I didn't love myself enough to like put up those boundaries and hold them. And so that was a really wild experience of, I went to the gym and went to the punching bag and listened to rageful music a lot, for months after that, and would have sessions of punching, crying. They have this nice little isolated punching bag room at the gym that I go to. And it was mostly about my own self, like not honoring myself.
Yeah.
That was a big learning experience for me.
Yeah. Our relationships are usually our greatest teachers.
Yeah.
Gets right to the heart of things.
Absolutely. Man, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for this conversation. There's other things I'm so curious about, like ancestral grief, generational grief. I think that should be its own conversation, or could be.
Totally.
Would love to do that someday. And for now, yeah, maybe we'll wrap this up for now. And how can people find you, Fox?
The best way to connect with me is through my website, which is foxhealing.com. And that's kind of the central point to a lot of my healing work, which is one-on-one, and then grief work, rituals, and trainings. And so whether you're local to the Asheville area or you're anywhere out there, there are opportunities to be connected. These trainings that are coming up, there's going to be some on Zoom where anybody can connect in. And there's a whole team we've been building of grief tenders to bring ritual to different places. So if you want this in your neck of the woods, wherever that may be, feel free to reach out. And we'll, some have talked about doing a grief tour in this next year, because there's so much of it out there.
Yeah.
But there's a newsletter you can jump on in there, and lots of different grief resources if you're kind of going through it. I also do, besides the private practice where I primarily do the grief tending along with acupuncture, I'll also do wellness coaching, which employs a lot of these one-on-one ways of helping guide people in their journey, helping guide people through their grief initiations.
Awesome.
And so if you're interested in that, that's a video thing. Connect with me on that website and be happy to help you on that journey.
Nice. And I'll put some resources in the show notes as well. You'll find Fox's website there, some of the books that we talked about, hopefully some of your favorite books and resources on the topic too, Fox. And thank you all so much for listening. And thank you, Fox, for this conversation, for normalizing grief, for celebrating it, and helping us all just live better, more full lives. Thanks for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So cheers to your pleasure and success. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. Till then, I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful, authentic day. Peace.